and welcome to the Bennington Community Policing Advisory Review Board meeting for Thursday, February 16th at the Bennington Firehouse in the 3rd floor. My name is Kelly Carroll, and I have the pleasure of chairing the board, and I would like to quickly introduce the other board members, and we'll start with Scott.
Scott Richmond.
Will Greer.
Marsh Hudson Knapp.
Robert Ebert.
Okay. And then we also have our select board liaison, Tom Haley. And we have our guest speaker tonight, Merrill Bent. And I'd also like to thank Cat TV and Jim Byers for being here and taking care of all of this. So to start the meeting, Marsh, would you read the town vision statement?
I would love to. Bennington is a welcoming, engaged, inclusive, and resilient community where everyone, regardless of identity, shares in our vitality and benefits from an outstanding quality of life. May it be so.
Thank you, Marsh. Next on the agenda is the consent of agenda and the approval of the previous agenda minutes. Can I get a motion to approve?
I move, I so move.
Can I get a second?
A second.
Okay. Great. Are there any changes or errors in either the consent agenda or the approval of the previous agenda minutes? Can I get a motion to accept?
I make a motion to accept the minutes.
Can I get a second?
I guess I'll second.
All those approved? So moved? All those? Okay. So moved. Aye. So moved. Anyway, thank you very much for being here. Scott and Robert. Okay. All right. Next on the agenda is the public comment, and first up we have Jack Rossiter-Munley.
Hello, I'm Jack Rossiter-Munley from here in Bennington, Vermont, and I know the board has been very busy and will indeed be busy today doing a bunch of different trainings so that you can prepare for future events. But I was curious, just sort of as a point of information about the board's activities, if there's been any interaction between the board and the select board or the town or the police department around some of the lawsuits that have recently occurred. Just curious. I know that part of these trainings is figuring out where CPARB fits into all of these kinds of things, and in the interim I was wondering how that kind of communication is happening, if it is happening.
It is not happening because some of it is pending litigation, some of the new headlines, and that isn't anything that we would get involved in. And the last prior select board in January actually approved the policy for all of that, and we still have to work out the procedure. So when we get to that, we will start looking at prioritizing things to review, I guess. So I hope that answers your question. Anyone else want to, for public comment? Jonathan, did you? I just wanted to check.
I don't think it, so.
Okay, I just wanted to check. All right. So next on our agenda, if there's no other public comment, is the CPARB training, and I'm going to turn the floor over to Attorney Merrill Bent.
Hi, everybody. I'm Merrill Bent. I'm with the law firm of Wilmington, Campbell, Bent, and Stasny in Manchester, and we serve as the town attorney for the town of Bennington. Following up on Jack's question, also the resolution for Community Policing Advisory Review Board that was approved by the Select Board, at least the last version that I saw, does expressly state that the board will not play any role in civil or criminal litigation, which, and I can't speak to those to recent suits either, but just to add on that that's expressly not part of the CPARB role, at least for now. So I've got 3 handouts that I did make extra copies for members of the public if they would like, and they're sitting right here at the end of the table. One of them is just a document that I created, which is what I'm going to go over tonight about the complaint review process as it stands. The second one is the Resolution for Community Policing Advisory Review Board, which is the resolution by the Select Board. And the third one is a statute that I'm going to be referring to, a copy of the statute that I'm going to be referring to in the course of this training. So the purpose of the training tonight is to talk about the review process, and I will put in the caveat that we've got an outline of a review process. We have the mechanics, we have an outline of the mechanics, I should say, but since the board hasn't been reviewing complaints yet, and since we're still setting up, there may be room for discussion about what makes sense, and there could still be some room for moving parts here, but this is how things stand right now. The complaint review process does also dovetail with the Bennington Police Department's quality control, internal investigations, and discipline policy, which I do think you folks have a copy of in your materials as well. And I'm not even sure I have the most recent version of that, but it does have the internal policy, which plays a big role in how this process works. So just to start out with, there are a couple ways that a complaint can make its way to review. A complaint can be made directly to this body, in which case whoever is receiving the complaint should encourage the complaining person to fill out the citizen complaint form. I don't know if that form has been created yet, but if it hasn't been, it should be soon. And if that's not practicable, and I think we touched on this in our last meeting together with me, if that's not practicable, for example, if somebody either doesn't wish to or cannot complete that form, then the person taking the complaint can, accept as much of the information, break down as much of the information as they can and complete the citizen complaint form to the extent possible for both documentation and tracking purposes. So I could imagine a situation in which somebody either doesn't want to fill out a complaint or simply doesn't have the ability to do that. So in that event, you may take down the information and pass it along to other board members. The other way, yes?
So Meryl, you're saying that we might also receive complaints and we might end up having somebody fill out a form, or we might fill it out with them if they aren't. I mean, some people feel really intimidated.
You would just take the information and pass it along.
Okay.
And I'm going to talk about the different kinds of complaints because this board doesn't have investigative powers and this board doesn't have powers over the disciplinary process. So probably in most cases, you would take the information and immediately turn it over to the police department for their review and their investigation.
Okay.
This is just for purposes of exactly what you're talking about. If somebody's not comfortable going directly to the police department, there should be an avenue for them to fill out the form or at least provide somebody with the information to pass that along to the police department in most cases. The other way a complaint could be initiated is by lodging a complaint with the police department directly. And that can come from an internal source. For example, if one member of the police department has seen something that they don't think is right and they want to make a complaint about another person in the police department, or it can come from an external source, in which case it would be a similar process. Did you have a question? Oh. A similar process where they should be encouraged to complete the citizen complaint form. And the ideal situation is that they complete the form themselves because they have firsthand information and firsthand knowledge of the basis for the complaint. But again, if that's not practicable, then for whatever reason, then Bennington police personnel who accepts the complaint should complete the form, gather the information, complete the form to the extent possible for both documentation and tracking purposes. And then they should forward it in a manner that's consistent with their own internal policies, because it's very important that members of the police department follow internal policies and follow the chain of command where that's applicable. So we sort of covered the next section, which is the complaints made directly to the CPARB. And in any instance that it raises a personnel disciplinary concern, it must be referred to the police department for their investigation and review, because that role statutorily still remains within the police department, or if the complaint actually is about the chief of police, then it should be referred to the town manager.
So are you saying that if we get a complaint about the chief of police, do we still go to the department or the town manager?
That's to Stu. If it's
Okay.
about the chief of police, I would turn that over to Stuart.
Okay.
For non-personnel disciplinary,
Meryl?
yes.
I just want to clarify something. Because some of the paperwork that we have says that we will not receive complaints, and then so does it depend, is that what you're going to get into later as to the specific type of complaint,
Well,
or is that changed?
Most of the time, you should encourage people to make the complaint to the police department in like 99% of cases, but if there's a circumstance where somebody doesn't feel comfortable doing that for whatever reason, I think, there's an avenue for you to collect the information and turn it over
Okay.
as appropriate. And I'm covering this, if you receive something that's a non-disciplinary complaint, I suppose there's nothing stopping the board from considering the complaint if it chooses to, but because you don't have investigative authority, it would really, in order to actually look into it any further, it would need to be referred to the body with investigative authority, which is the police department or the town manager. Yes?
So what does the phrase "can consider" mean?
I mean, I think it's largely dependent on what the subject of the complaint
I understand
is.
that. What is the verb "consider"? What do you mean we can consider it?
Like, you can look at it and decide what to do with it. Decide how to handle it, where to direct it.
Okay, so we could decide not to refer it to the police department. Is that what that means?
That's a good question. I mean, I think if it's something where you can just say, this isn't the right place for this complaint, you could send it to the appropriate place. Like, if it's not actually, so this is something, I'm on a lot of boards that receive complaints. In a lot of instances, we get complaints that have nothing to do with the mandate of that board. So if it's a complaint about the sheriff's department,
Okay.
you can say, you've come to the wrong place.
But we're talking about non-personnel disciplinary complaints towards the police department. That's what we're talking about. So I don't know what it means that we can consider it.
That you can look at it and decide what to do with it. So
So we can decide
send
we
it,
will not refer this to the police department.
because it has nothing to do with the police department.
That doesn't what this says. It says for a non-personnel disciplinary complaint, so we're assuming it's a complaint targeted at the police department, not at highway department. I'm not sure what it means to say that we can consider it. What are we considering?
Just that you can review it and not, like, you can look at the actual words of the complaint and
Okay.
decide where it should be sent, how it should be dealt with.
So we could decide not to send it anywhere.
If it has, we can cover this a little bit further later on. I think that 99% of the time, if it's a complaint involving something to do with the Bennington Police Department, if you can figure out that that's what it's about, that's where it should be sent. If it's a complaint about the chief of police, it should be going to Stewart.
Understand.
If it has nothing to do with the police department, that's when you might say, you're in the wrong place, you need to go to, this needs to go to the sheriff's department, this needs to go to the state police. So if it's my poor phrasing and my,
I don't mean to be difficult, but it's confusing because
Yeah.
the phrase doesn't mean anything to me yet. So
okay.
I'm just trying to figure it out.
And I think, Meryl, I just would want to be clear, because if we were going to take in a complaint, we're not supposed to get involved in personnel issues.
Correct. That would always go to the police department.
Okay.
But again, you wouldn't refer.
We would
to
just be collecting data and passing on. But we're
Exactly.
supposed to have anonymized.
Yes, well, you're supposed to have anonymized. I'm just talking about the situation where somebody comes to you anyway.
Okay.
You should tell them that the correct place to direct the complaint is through the channel of the police department if it has to do with personnel. But like I said, if there's some absolute pushback on that, you can pass it along so the chief knows about it. What I would really be concerned about happening is somebody saying, I've got a complaint about the police department, I don't want to go directly to the police department, feel more comfortable bringing it to you, and having a situation where this board has its hands tied, not, it doesn't get referred anywhere, because you can neither act on it, nor can you force somebody to go bring it to the chief's attention or to the police department's attention. So I think in the event that you receive such a complaint, you should get as much information as you can and pass it along so that the investigation can occur.
And is that something that we do individually, or is that something we have to do as a board? How does that work with open meeting and privacy and
I think
like 40 other questions?
what I would recommend on that, I don't think there's a hard and fast rule, but what I would recommend is that everything is channeled through the chair.
Okay,
And we want to do that promptly, so we don't want to wait for a meeting.
Exactly.
Right.
So what I would envision typically is if one of you gets the email, I don't know, if somebody looks up who's on the board, they say, "I'm sending this to you, I really don't want to go to the police." You would forward it on to Kelly. Don't forward it on to the entire board, because then you've got other concerns to think about and how you do that. And then you can direct it to the right place. I mean, I just think the idea here is to have a little bit of latitude for situations that aren't as black and white and cut and dry as I want to make a complaint about the police and I'm perfectly comfortable going to the police department to do that.
So I'm so confused. So if we get it to Kelly and this person says, I have a complaint, but I don't want to take it to the police department, and we send them to Kelly and Kelly takes their information down, well, they've just said they don't want it sent to the police department, so why is she, what is she doing?
I'm not talking about a situation where they say, I don't want it sent. I'm talking about a situation where they're saying, I'm not comfortable going to the police department myself.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. If they don't want it sent, then I think that you say, well, I'm sorry that you had that experience,
Right.
but this is the way that we have to, this is the process that we have available to us at this point.
So if, let's say John Doe comes to me and says, I don't feel safe going to the police department. I've heard this from some people in the community that they are afraid of retaliation. So they could file an anonymous complaint, either with the police department, or they could tell one of us or write it out for one of us, and we could take it so that they never got personally with the police department. Now, there are a lot of drawbacks to that, because police can't talk with them, nobody can talk with them.
Right.
That would happen, but at least their complaint could get surfaced.
At least there would be knowledge of the fact of a complaint. I mean, I think that's important, and I think it's important if they know.
for trending.
Yeah, for
Possible
trends,
trending.
but also for the police department to know, hey, there's actually quite a number of people who are too scared to go to the police department and complain to you. You should know that.
Yeah.
Here's what we know about the complaint, which isn't much, but you should be aware of that. It should be part of your internal tracking. And, you know, a lot of those situations, you're going to end up with something saying it can't be substantiated, it can't be investigated. But you can't investigate something if you don't have the information to go on about what the actual complaint is. So I'm just thinking of ways that you're going to receive things. People don't always go through the process and the channels that we have set up. People will find email addresses, send it to whoever they think will listen, and try to, impose caveats on how the information is handled. And I think you have to have the ability to take a look, see what it is, and refer it on if it's not for you, if it's not in the right place yet. So for complaints made to the police department and referred disciplinary complaints and other substantive complaints about the police department, there's a process set forth in that quality control, internal investigations, and discipline policy. I have paraphrased that process in this document, but it's really has to do with how the police has to handle things, because they have considerations of due process, number one. They have constitutional considerations for how they handle internal investigations. But they also have to contend with state statute, and then they also have to comply with their own labor agreement. So there are a lot of considerations for that, which is why it should be going through their internal investigations policy and process. And I don't know if you want me to go through each of these steps, or if you want me to focus on the interplay between the police department and CPARB, which is sort of at the latter end of that process, because a lot of what the police department is going to do is figure out the correct channel and avenue for its own investigation, have the correct people investigate it, have the correct process for documenting, making recommendations, actually meting out discipline where it's warranted, and that policy has all of that information about different types of discipline that are available, sort of what the factors are for the police in terms of considering how to respond to a disciplinary complaint. And then those complaints, once they're completed, they are disclosed to the CPARB in terms of the fact of a complaint. The internal investigation policy also requires that the chief of police periodically provide a statistical summary of all the complaints that they've investigated to this body so that you can monitor trends and things like that. But it should also, in my mind, and this is not stated explicitly anywhere, have some way to convey to this body, you know, we had this number of complaints, here's how they were dealt with, which of these would you like to review? And maybe your answer is all of them.
I thought that was discussed at the select board meeting, and the select board agreed, along with the police, that all the complaints were going to come to the CPARB.
Yeah, well, the fact of all of them, and then you have the ability to say whether you want to review them or not. Yeah. The last time we talked about this, when I was present, and forgive me if I missed discussions with the select board, there was a thought that, oh, well, you may only want to review a selection of complaints, and I think this body said, well, we probably want to review all of them, at least for a while. So, and that's fine. So the way that I would deal with that is communication directly with the chief to say, for now, just send them all to us. We're not going to do a selection process of any kind, and we're not going to be picking and choosing. We're going to take a look at all of them.
We haven't seen anything yet, have we?
No, do we know when we might see something? Or?
As far as I know, we're still working on new software.
Excuse me. So you made a statement, I'm not quite sure I heard right. It sounded like you said that the chief will compile the data on complaints and then let us know. You said something about letting us know that.
He's supposed to provide it to you.
Okay. Provided to, so we don't have to ask to see them. He's going to send us all the complaint data automatically on some kind of routine basis?
So what the actual policy says is that he's going to provide a statistical summary. And so what I'm saying is, I think you're wanting a little bit more than that, or you're wanting to make sure that that statistical summary tells you actually the number of complaints and disposition of those complaints. So I think that's a matter at this point of communication with the chief to make sure you're on the same page. Yeah. But the obligation as stated in their internal policy is, it's framed as a statistical summary, but it, as informed by our last discussion, and it's possible, I haven't seen the most recent version of the policy, which is in flux, so it's possible that that's already addressed in the most recent version of it. Yeah, okay. I know we talked about it when we went over this. So, yeah, as we were talking about, CPARB can request to review any such complaint or other incident, but as we discussed, I think you're probably going to have a standing, send it all to us kind of communication. Chief will provide you with all of the information gathered in the course of the investigation. However, it will be redacting names and other personal identifying information as appropriate, which means in order to protect personnel information that is protected by law, and any other sort of legal requirement that they have to keep information confidential is what they're going to do before they turn it over to you. And I'm going to address an issue that I could see arising a little later about what happens if you get something that doesn't look right because it has information you shouldn't have. I'll talk about that in a minute. So I'm in this overview, I give the example that it will redact personnel records that are protected under Vermont law, the disciplinary outcome of any internal investigation to the extent it is protected under law or under the working agreement. And I think that's going to be most, if not all, outcomes.
So let me make sure I understand.
Sure.
We are not going to know what decision the chief made? Okay, seems ludicrous.
I understand your confusion with that, but because it is a matter of disciplinary review, it is just not under this board's purview. And the outcome of a disciplinary action is not within the scope of this board's purview.
Okay.
So I think there might be a little more forthcoming than that. The reports we got when we had the task force included the annual summaries.
Okay.
And they had the responses, which were, for example, there was a training required, or there was discipline. It didn't say what the discipline was,
Right.
but it did indicate
Something.
An outcome.
The particular kinds of things,
Yeah.
so that you need to learn more about mental health first aid, so we're going to make sure you get that training, or you need to have, there will be discipline for this particular action because it's happened before, or, so those general kinds of categories.
Right, okay.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the nuance I would probably make with that is a disposition versus the actual outcome, saying this is what happened, this is what the status is. It's still open, it's closed, there was discipline, it's closed, it wasn't substantiated, that kind of
Right.
thing. So you know in general terms, but you're not going to have detailed information about a disciplinary action that took place.
One of the things I wondered if it would be in there, maybe this is something we need to talk to the the department about, but it's whether we hear that the complainant got informed as well. Because I know the policy now says inform the complainant if possible. And before it just said you're obligated to inform the complainant, and it'd be nice to know that, there's a stream of people who are really hearing about it, but there are some people who aren't, but it's like there is some accountability for actually informing the person. And I know there's a goal to do that, but
I think that language is probably geared towards the situation in which they have received an anonymous complaint or they otherwise cannot locate the person who
Right.
made the complaint, which I unfortunately could imagine being the case in various circumstances. Either somebody leaves or they don't want to be found. But I agree that the goal is to make sure that there's that accountability piece of the person making the complaint actually knowing that something happened with it and that it was looked into and that it wasn't just put in the circular file. I do think that's an important component of any type of.
We haven't seen the actual layout of the report and what we're going to get, so I'm hopeful that that's going to actually be part of the data that we're going to get.
Yep.
And if not, we can request it.
I agree, and I think, again, this is a new process and a new body. I think if you get a complaint form and you say, gosh, I'd really like to see this other information, that's a conversation you can have. And you can invite the chief of police, you can invite the town manager to your meeting to say, we'd really like to see this. Is there any reason why it's not included? If there is no reason, could you please include it? And I think there has to be a readiness to have that ongoing conversation, number one, and to be able to evolve the process as you figure out what works and what doesn't. Because you guys are the guinea pigs of figuring out how to make this work.
It would be nice to have the information on any kind of training, not necessarily any kind of discipline, like somebody was suspended or with or without pay or anything, but if somebody's getting continuous complaints and the chief sends them out for training.
What kind of training?
What kind of training?
Yeah.
Because part of the responsibility of this board is to look at this information and recommend training for the police department based on the actions that are occurring, the complaints that are occurring. So if we don't have any idea what kind of training they're getting based on actions.
How are you supposed to
complaints,
recommend? Yeah.
How are we supposed to, because we may look at a complaint and say, oh, we've seen this several times, maybe the department should have this kind of training, but they've already done it and we don't know. Or, so that piece of information I think is very important for us to have. What kind of training are the officers receiving? Is the chief receiving, the lieutenant receiving? So when we are looking at complaints, we can make an informed decision on various other training.
Right, so you're not just recommending the same training that they already had and maybe doesn't seem to be sticking.
So I think something like that, we can handle, and I know you're going to go into this, but there is an opportunity for us to go into executive session when there's specific personnel issues.
Correct.
So that would be the opportunity for us to find out, say, hey, what kind of training is it? Because we don't want to, maybe make a recommendation, and maybe we can't make a recommendation for a specific person. That's something we're going to have to try to push the envelope on. But if there are trends, and, we're seeing similar types of complaints, then maybe it's helpful for us to be able to say, hey, listen, I think the whole department needs this training, or we think that.
Yeah, and I think also part of that conversation would be where are these trainings being offered? Are there other resources? Are there other trainings that should be created? Are there other trainings that should be requested and developed if you have an ongoing problem that doesn't seem to be addressed? And yes, that is part of the review process that you have is an invitation and meeting with the chief to have a conversation about particular complaints or particular trends, which you can do in open session if appropriate. But then, as you alluded to, there are certain circumstances where you should have that conversation in executive session, which I'll explain the basis for that in a little bit. But actually, that's the next.
Can I ask real quick?
Yeah.
If we went into executive session to discuss a situation, would that give us the right or the authority to ask what discipline was? If it's a situation where it was discipline?
No, unfortunately, I don't think so. Just the way that this is set up and the way that it meshes with the internal policies of the police, state law, and your overall role, I think you'd still have to be talking in general terms about outcomes, but you could certainly say, hey, we want more information on what these trainings are.
Right, training, when it's training, yeah. Okay.
Yep. Excuse me, I'm just going to grab my water bottle.
Yeah, and one of the things that's not immediately pertinent to this, but is talking with one of the officers in the police department, they were saying that some of the training they've just memorized the answers in their computer programs. And so we might want to at some point ask the officers if they have input on the particular trainings that they get so that we can find out from them, is this really helping you, or is this just something you've memorized now and it's a waste of everybody's time?
And we can get into that when we talk about training.
Right, which isn't not pertinent to this.
Yep.
I was just using Meryl's walking time to.
No, that's fine. My walking and my water drinking time. So yeah, the next bullet point does cover, you get to review the materials, you get to review them in accordance with the powers that you actually have under the select board's resolution creating the board. And then you can have that conversation with the chief of police, as we discussed, either in open session or executive session if applicable. Most of the executive session provisions are not going to be applicable, but there are a couple that you might be able to use if they apply to what you're talking about. Executive session, though, is not, you have to legitimately have a basis in the executive session list of bases. You cannot use it as just, let's go have a private conversation.
One of the things that is on my mind is sometimes when you're talking about things that can feel hurtful or, I think about like being an officer and having complaints that might relate to me if I were an officer. When we're thinking about things, you know, do you think this was really a dumb move, or, you know, it seems like sometimes we might need to talk about how we respond in ways that don't end up being hurtful to other people. Do you know what I'm trying to get at?
Yeah, I think there's a balance there, because the point of this process is to have those hard conversations and to be frank about what's wrong and to try to find ways to address it. And I think part of being on a board is carefully choosing your words, understanding that your goal is to strike that balance. And you're not here to insult people or belittle people or tell them, you know, even how to do their job, so to speak, but you are here to point out your observations about something's not right. This went sideways. It went sideways in a lot of ways, and you have to be able to have that conversation. So I think that's just a matter of doing that in as respectful and professional a way as you can. Understanding that, yes, this is, you know, the people who may be on the receiving end, it is their job and their livelihood, but they serve a really important role in the community, and we have to all strive to improve on that where there are deficiencies. So the next bullet point just talks about, you know, if by looking at complaints or the statistical summary, you determine that there's a need for training somewhere, other community collaboration efforts. Your mandate is very clear that you have a lot of ways to make recommendations. Unfortunately, recommendations is all they are, but I think if you have that very open and professional line of communication and respectful line of communication, I think that the Bennington Police Department will be very receptive to those recommendations, and they may be able to educate you on what might work better for them, what is more appropriate in a law enforcement setting, because it is a unique setting. But I think that it's, you know, you might recommend changes to their policies, you might recommend changes to how they implement policies. You know, that's not how I read that policy, that kind of thing. But I thought one of the things that was suggested in one of the summaries of this board was, you know, maybe recommending a mediation if there's really a problem and there needs to be some communication saying, hey, this doesn't seem to be resolved, this keeps coming up. Is there a way to have some kind of meeting with a neutral, with these stakeholders, whether that is individual members of the community or whether it's an organization, and making that recommendation and seeing if people will engage in that process, because it gives a lot more latitude in an atmosphere that isn't just, you know, finger pointing. It's more of a communication and more of a collaborative effort to find creative solutions. Yes.
So
our recommendations are made to the chief of police, not to the town manager or the select board. We recommend things to the police chief.
Correct.
And that's as far as they go.
Well, you could always write a letter to the select board or the town manager and say, things are, you know, I want you to be aware of this. And in a sense, that's still a recommendation, but the police chief has the authority over disciplinary control of his officers, except to the extent that that gets escalated to the town manager. But nothing's stopping you from, as a body, saying, I want to have this communication with the select board, I want to have this communication with the town manager so that they're aware.
I'm also here.
Right, but I'm trying to figure out where the policy says we make our recommendations. It doesn't say we're making recommendations to the select board, who has the authority to act. Our recommendations are going to the chief of police. That's just what I'm trying to figure out.
Well, we could make the recommendation to the chief of police and copy the town manager and the select board with our recommendations.
We can do that, yeah.
You can.
We certainly can.
I mean, you can make recommendations wherever you want, but, you know, the person who's going to be in the best position to figure out how to implement that in practice is the person who has the authority over those practices.
So Meryl, you had said that if, like mediation, talking with either a complainant, a citizen, or an organization or something, and having a meeting about that, how would we do that? Would that happen within our meeting? Would it be a special meeting?
No,
How does that?
that would be a recommendation you're making for them to go do
Okay,
separate from the board. You'd
Okay.
be say, hey, I think this could benefit from somebody neutral having a conversation with,
but we wouldn't actually be part of that. It would be just a,
correct.
okay.
So I know that we've talked about this exhaustively, but this body is subject to open meeting law and the Vermont Public Records Act, so I know we went over that. And it's really a unique situation here because you are reviewing sensitive information, albeit with the sensitive information removed. But I can imagine a scenario where you might be able to piece together who's who and what's what. And you have to be cognizant of that because this body does not have what's called a quasi-judicial role, meaning you are not acting as a judge the way, for example, the Development Review Board does, where they take evidence and they make a decision, because bodies like that have what's called deliberative privilege, where they can have a conversation among themselves that is a private conversation. Your conversations as a body, with the exception of executive sessions where appropriate, it's always going to be in your open sessions. It's always going to be an open meeting. So you just have to be very sensitive to that fact. And the same goes for your written communications with each other.
So that means that, because we've been thinking about the numbers game, you know, you can't talk to more than 2 other people, but you're saying in these matters we can't talk to one other person. So we couldn't talk to the chair about this issue?
Well, you could you can have a one-on-one conversation with the chair about, hey, what do I do with this? I don't know what the process is for this. That's not going to trigger open meeting, but what I'm talking about is the fact that when you're meeting as a body and you have a quorum and you're actually in an open meeting, you don't have that ability to go into a deliberative session for decision-making purposes. A lot of boards that make decisions do have that ability when they're acting in a quasi-judicial role, but it doesn't exist if you don't have a quasi-judicial function. So it's
for example, we had a discussion about a situation, and let's say I felt uncomfortable about the way it was going or how it ended up. It would be okay for me to talk to the chair about that personally.
to get some.
It'd either be public or it wouldn't happen.
Right. Remember, it's a public. It turns into a public meeting when you're. Yeah, exactly. So you want to have those conversations, and there's a quorum. Yeah, yeah. And then if the chair is uncertain about something and says, "Ooh, I really don't know how to handle that," then you would just go talk to Stuart Hurd and say, "What do I do?" Or Tom. Yep, that's fine too.
Tom's here.
Yeah, he'll be here.
Oh, so let me just add, I think I know the answer, but say 2 board members could correspond by email and discuss things between the 2 of them, that's okay?
It's technically doesn't trigger an open meeting, but it's still a public record,
Okay,
and I don't recommend it.
no.
I would recommend avoiding it as much as you can and doing as much as you can in the light of day and in an open session as you can.
Right, good.
So yeah, any emails you send about board business, don't forget. Write it like your friends, neighbors, the judge, all of those people are going to be reading it.
And don't send it to everybody.
And don't send it to everybody, yeah.
So yeah, when I do emails, I send them just to Kelly.
Yep, that's the right way to do it. I mean, scheduling is a different thing. If it's purely administrative, is everybody available Thursday night at 6 o'clock? That's completely fine to do as a board, but it's when you get into substantive discussions about matters that are part of your purview that that's when you get into problems and triggering open meeting requirements. So just a couple of other considerations. If you find that you get a set of information from the BPD and it looks like, or from some other source, and it looks like it has confidential information that should have been redacted, you should stop talking about it. You should make sure that it's not publicly disclosed, in the sense like don't post it on the website, don't email it around, and then you should contact the chief of police or the town manager right away to ask them how they want to handle that. And it may be something as simple as everybody delete that version, I'll send you a new version. I mean, that's not an ideal situation, but it's because it's hard to put that genie back in the bottle. But I do think you have to be aware that, you know, just because it was handed over doesn't mean necessarily, question it, and because if it doesn't look right, if you're so used to getting complaints with all the names out and the, you know, suddenly you get a complaint that has all that information in, just think, oh, this might not have been meant for us.
So would that be a similar thing if, let's say, we get a complaint and all the names are out, but I look at it and read it and say, wow, I know that's my next door neighbor, and I think other people could sort that out, then we would treat it the same way, would we?
I would maybe ask for some advice, but the reality is in a small town, you might be able to put those things together. And if it's really obvious and really sensitive, I mean, I would maybe go and get some guidance from one of these folks, like the chief or the town manager. But if it's just like, yes, I can piece together from the context, I'll, you know, just do your best to make sure that you're speaking about it in oblique terms and not revealing that information and not adding information that isn't contained in the documents.
So
that's another.
My next door neighbor, keep my mouth shut, but not add something that I know.
Exactly.
That's going to get tricky, isn't it? Because if we identify,
Right.
fortunately, I don't have many next door neighbors.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't, what you want to be careful of there is like, well, I happen to know that so-and-so, yeah, you just stay away from that.
Meryl, what if it's a complaint that we receive?
That's, so if you happen to get one, you get the email from the errant email sent to you, I mean, or the phone call, you get the information, you hand it off, you keep it to yourself. I mean, there's not much you can do to bar people from blurting something out. You can say, I'm not in the position to accept that information. Please pass it along to the police chief or the police department. And again, if they say, I'm really not comfortable doing that, take down the information you can, pass it on, and don't dwell on it.
So if I get information, I get a complaint as the chair, and I send it on to the police department. Everybody else finds out about it when the complaint comes to us in the statistical summary stuff. I don't say anything to anybody else, right? Okay.
Keep the information you received. And just remember, it's the person making the complaint, they don't have a legal restriction on them to disclose that information. That restriction is actually on the police department as they handle it. So when the information is going the other way, there's a little bit more latitude to say, okay, I'm going to pass this complaint along, and I'm just going to, when it comes back to me, going to work on the documents that I have in front of me. But that brings up another really important point, which is if you figure out that looking at a complaint, just even the bare bones information you have, or in hearing the complaint, you start to piece together that it's your sister or your your business partner or somebody else who you know closely enough that you're running into the conflicts of interest policy, then you should be recusing yourself from the conversation entirely.
So that means leaving the meeting altogether or not?
You don't participate in the discussion, and you don't, I mean, not that you guys are making determinations, but you just don't participate in the discussion. Well,
You don't accept any materials and you don't participate in any discussion. If you can't be objective, then just step back and let everybody else do it.
You don't have to leave, but what I would usually tell people to do in this scenario is to step away from your table as a sitting member so that you don't have the appearance of participation, just for that discussion, that piece of the discussion, and then come back. But it's not like you can't hear it, you just shouldn't be part of the conversation.
What about if it was one of those private issues that did have to go into executive session? Should you just not go?
You should just not go.
Okay.
Yeah, I have a quick question real quick. So Marsh and I, when we were in our research review committee meeting, we came up with a few questions, and I feel like this is relevant to one of them about recusing yourself and kind of establishing a base criteria for what you would go off of. If there is anything about, criteria for confidentiality and conflict of interest, what would you advise based on the information you've given us tonight?
Well, there should be at least a conflicts of interest policy, so that's what you should go on. And it's a written policy that towns have, which is based on statute. So you would just look at the policy and base your determination on that. But I always tell people that if you look at the policy and you don't fit squarely into one of the categories that it says is a conflict of interest, but something just does not feel right about your participation for another reason, just err on the side of recusing yourself, because it's just a better practice, and then you don't have to second guess your decision and your participation.
So could we ask for a conflict of interest policy from the town?
I think we've been given that, haven't we?
I don't think I have it.
Conflict of interest policy, I thought we did. So is simple knowledge of the identity of a principal, does that constitute conflict of interest? So can you just give me an example, considering that we make no decisions, we're not quasi-judicial or anything, an example of what a conflict of interest would be? If
I would
happen to know
say
what it
if you discern the identity of a person just by context, and you know that you have a close relationship with anybody involved that falls within that conflict of interest policy, because there's definitions of what constitutes a conflict of interest.
Okay, right.
Yeah, like a financial interest is one of them, and then familial relationships is another one. But sometimes you just say, well, that's my best friend, and I don't feel comfortable
Right.
being involved. But also, it could even, it theoretically could also be a topic, not just a person. If it's a topic that you're like, I cannot discuss this in an unbiased manner because I feel so strongly about it, you should also be considering whether you should be part of that discussion. Because that can cloud judgment, it can cloud reactions to things, just as well as a personal relationship could.
Right, I'm also assuming like a business relationship would
Yeah,
count
yes.
as part of that? Okay.
Yes, a business relationship is, but like, a close business relationship. Sometimes people try to say, well, that person works for my cousin's employer, and so that's, I've seen those kind of arguments, and it's like, no, we live in a small state, in a small town, you have to be realistic about these things.
And appearance of conflict of interest is another issue, so it might not be strictly so, but let's say, oh, my family knows I know, then all of a sudden it's tacky, and there might be the appearance that I have a conflict of interest, and that would be a good reason to recuse myself, or not.
I tend to agree with that. It's not as strictly required, although nobody can make you recuse yourself anyway. So there is a...
Make this process feel like it's fair to everybody.
Right. I mean,
That's really important.
when I have a situation where I'm advising a board and there are 6 complaints about, well, so-and-so lives right next door to the proposed project, shouldn't they not be on the board? That's a time when you might have a conversation of the appearance of a conflict, whether you personally feel that you're conflicted or not. It's important also to give confidence to the community members that you're serving and representing. So that would be a time that you would maybe consider it, even if it's based strictly on the paper, you don't feel like you have a straight up conflict of interest, textbook definition. So as it stands, Oh, so I was going to actually refer you to section 313, which is the executive sessions section. Most of these things are not going to be applicable. I think the most likely basis that you would ever be discussing a possible executive session is under subsection A3. And even though you theoretically aren't going to be aware of the identity or the disciplinary outcome, you're still generally discussing evaluation of public officers or employees. So there might be sensitive situations in which that would be applicable. And in order to go into an executive session, you have to state which of these exceptions you are relying on, state the basis for it. You have to move to go into executive session. Everybody else is excluded. You can have advisors in an executive session, but no members of the public, and it's not obviously broadcast. Sorry. And then, and then you would make a motion to leave executive session. You could resume your open session afterwards. So, like I said, this is really an evolving situation in the sense that we don't know exactly how things are going to flow and work yet. I think we've got an outline, but I encourage all of you to keep those lines of communications open if something just doesn't seem to be working, because just because this is the way that it's set up now doesn't necessarily mean that it can't be changed. And if you're saying, hey, one of the things that we're supposed to be doing is X, and it would be really helpful if we had this other information or if we were able to do this other thing, that's a conversation it might be a conversation with the police department, with the chief about the policy, the information exchange policies, but it might also be a conversation with the select board about modifications to what your role is overall. And that's a bigger conversation, but if you are just like, we can't operate like this, you might make suggestions for those kinds of adjustments. And then the last thing I wanted to point out is that we're talking about the review process of complaints and other information. What I left off here was the possibility that you receive compliments. And those, obviously, that's a little bit less of an issue when it comes to sensitivity of information and things like that. So if you receive them, take them into account, and you can pass those on to whoever the party receiving the compliment is.
I hope we record them, because that's part of, that they would go through the process too, because
Yeah.
we want to get some balance. We don't want to just do everything bad and nobody will tell us anything that's really great.
Well, and I think it should be part of the conversation that you're having too about where we need to focus work. Hey, look, this is really working well. Why can't we do something similar in this area? Maybe we can learn something from this thing that's going really well. And, reviewing complaints is just one of your functions. A lot of your functions is to analyze and synthesize the information that you're getting and make recommendations, do some, not only recommendations about how the police policies are going, but hey, what other collaborations could we be suggesting with other organizations? Where are lines of communication closed off when they should be open? So that's all a big part of what your job is. So it's not just strictly a review of the nitty-gritty of the complaints. Big picture. You got the big picture stuff too. And I think, again, I think that you're going to be, once you start receiving the information, honing what additional information you'd like to see to make sure that you have that big picture. So that's what I got. Other questions?
Anything on the we have
the sheet, there is one that we discussed, and I don't think it really got brought up, but I'll ask it anyway. We really wanted to know about how we can make recommendations, this has been asked before, about how to support and advocate for things that are going through the town, the state, whatever legislative function. Something's going to change and be affecting something like CPARB or the police department. How can we make recommendations, if any, and make them neutral without making it seem partisan in nature? That's what we
Neutral. Well, I mean, you could decide as a board that hey, we are taking a position on X or Y. We want to give our input on it.
Right, and so that would be our opinion and not the select board's opinion? Because I don't think you all would want us to maybe reflect on you all, but I'm assuming.
That would be this body, yes.
Okay.
And you would just make it clear how you were doing that. But then, I mean, all of you retain your individual identities to get involved in those other things. Just make sure that if you are giving a personal opinion about something that isn't part of a board stance, that you put in, that you don't put, my name is so-so, member of the. So, be very careful about making sure that you're not giving an indication that you're speaking on behalf of a body if you're not in fact speaking on behalf of a body.
Right, I guess you would recuse yourself in a way from being a member of that board. I'm kidding, but
I mean, obviously being a member of a board is something that you put on a list of credentials maybe, but what you want to avoid is having a situation where the way that you've written something or submitted something makes it sound like you're speaking on behalf of the body.
Right, yeah, I think you answered the question. We went a little off of it, but just basically we have the kind of power or authority to do these things of advocating on that behalf, but not necessarily, we may not want to
I would
get in on that.
Say you want to, wouldn't get involved in partisan politics like you said, but on an issue.
Right.
If you start advocating for a particular candidate, or that's where you don't want to be in that situation, but.
So for example, the NAACP had a meeting recently and they were talking about legislation that is being proposed this year to not stop people for small infractions, and with the hope that it might reduce unnecessary stops. And the sad things that sometimes have been happening around our country in unnecessary stops. Is that something that we would rightly have anything to say about, or is that something we should talk about personally but not talk about as a board?
Yeah, I'd have to think. I really have to think about that one.
Good.
Yeah, go ahead.
Wouldn't an individual simply bring that to the chair to put on the board agenda? The board would consider a resolution about it, and then you vote yes or no?
Well, they can do that, but
It occurs to, I mean, you can decide, as a board, they would decide the appropriateness of having that sort of discussion, resolution, and decision on their agenda.
they can certainly have the conversation. I'm just wondering, there might be circumstances where the wisdom of such a resolution is something that.
Wouldn't that be at the discretion of the chair to say, I don't think this is appropriate to put on the agenda for discussion and potential resolution?
Yes, I mean, I guess what you're saying is sort of what I'm saying, which is you've got to take it on a case-by-case basis and be careful of where you put your foot.
Yeah, I guess all I'm thinking of is that I think the board members can feel free to bring whatever they think might be important or useful to the chair for consideration.
True, yes. There's nothing stopping people from doing that. I'm just, I'm thinking about particular issues is a trickier thing.
So I think what they're asking about is like some of the legislation regarding charter changes for more authority for our board and whether or not we should be, as a board, lobbying for that. And I'll be honest, we're not a political board, so that does make me uncomfortable. I think what we do in our own private, and I know I certainly do my share of advocating with Montpelier is one thing, but I just think we have to be really, really careful crossing that that
I agree, but
political
I
line.
think you can provide information in a lot of instances that would be very valuable to the discussion without necessarily taking a position.
Is that something you might be available on, like if we asked a question through Tom and for some
Yeah,
advice
I
on
think
or
that's
something,
when I would-
if that time comes?
That's when I would want to not answer off the cuff in terms of, here's what, this, there's no hard and fast rule is what I'm trying to say. It'd be one that you'd want to review on a case-by-case basis. Other questions?
Any other questions?
Sorry.
Jack Rossiter-Munley from Bennington. I had another question sort of specifically about the bounds of review and also how review and the limits on the review powers of the board would potentially impact other activities that I know they're considering undertaking, like public listening sessions. And part of it is because of how this one part of the charge is phrased, and so I was just wanting to get some clarity on that. Because it came up a little bit in my initial question during public comment that I didn't intend to be relevant in here, because my question was really more about outside of the review processes of the board, there's a major news story about the police that people in the community are discussing, and the sort of community advising side rather than the review side of the board's activities is where I was sort of asking that question. But because of that, I did go and look at this portion of the charge, and while it says CPARB does not have the power or authority to investigate, review, or otherwise participate in matters involving specific police personnel or specific police-related incidents, there's a whole other sentence that comes after that. The CPARB will not receive or review complaints initiated against personnel of the police, nor play any role in civil or criminal litigation. So how would that play out, not playing any role, as it's currently phrased, if there's a public listening session and people want to talk about civil or criminal litigation that's currently underway or other matters? They're not looking for the review process to be triggered, but just because of how this is written as that they will not play any role, does that mean that they can't then try and think about how to incorporate the things they hear from the public into the other trainings they might recommend, the other, I don't know, role that they play as a community policing advisory board outside of the review aspect of what they do?
I wouldn't view having general conversations about important issues as having a role in criminal or civil litigation. You can certainly talk about it. What I wouldn't want to see is a conversation about, this is, talking about specifics of allegations in a complaint, to the extent that there's knowledge, but to talk about general issues raised by a complaint or a pattern of complaints that are being received is completely appropriate, and it's not, in my view, it wouldn't be considered taking a role in the litigation. I think what we're trying to get at there is, you're not taking a position for the town in litigation, you're not discussing how, you're not taking a position on the facts of a case. That's really important. But having a conversation of, hey, we keep getting these lawsuits for this problem, and maybe we should be talking about that is fine. Yeah.
Hi, Jeannie Jenkins from Bennington. There exists a complaint review protocol that the select board created and used the one time that we have reviewed a complaint.
Okay.
And it feels like this is an opportunity for the CPARB to look at that, because it's a working document. It's only been used once. It was put together with council's advice and best recommendations from people around the state that had been involved in such matters. But, if you have an opportunity to do a review, that's the only document that Bennington has right now. So I think it would be helpful to spend some time looking at that protocol.
Yeah, could you repeat the name of it again?
It's complaint review protocol.
Is it on the website?
Yeah, it's on, I believe it is on the website.
If it's not, I'm sure it's.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it is on the website, but we can certainly get it.
That's a great idea, Jim.
Okay.
Thank you. I mean, if we can find ways to not reinvent the wheel, that's great.
Yeah, Merrill?
Yes.
You said something like, if we see there are a bunch of lawsuits, kind of about the same thing, maybe that's something we should discuss so we can, advise or review. Is the same true about a specific lawsuit? Can we discuss a lawsuit and its implications and wonder whether we should be making any advice or review based on it?
I think you'd be talking more about trends and issues, not about a specific lawsuit. And the concern there is somebody says the wrong thing and makes a statement as fact that is not actually factual. It can just create a quagmire for all sorts of reasons.
About if after the lawsuit is, let's say, settled, I mean, it's over, it's done, can we then just go, well, boy, this was serious, we need to...
I would hope we
wonder if
would
they
have
need
gotten
more
the
training.
complaint by then.
What's that?
I would have hoped we would have gotten the complaint by then and had a chance to review it instead of,
Right. But just in general, can we
The
put it
fact-
on the agenda to talk about, why did we get sued for this,
I think the facts and the issues, certainly, there could be, there's a possibility that there's, well, no, actually, that wouldn't apply, but the fact of a lawsuit, the issues that it raised, I think all of that is okay to talk about.
Okay.
I mean, it's part of this, it's part of it, at that point, it would be part of the, what's
so when,
going on.
so
You can't
when a law-
ignore it.
when a lawsuit happens and it's final, it's okay to say to BPT, hey, we want you to come in here. We can't talk about the specific lawsuit, but we want to talk about the topic. And we want you to talk to us about what's your policy and your process. What's different now? What did we do to prevent this from happening again? That we can,
That's a conversation you
Sit
can
with them.
invite.
Yeah.
I mean, do you have the power to force the police to come in and tell you, oh, we're going to do this differently? No, but absolutely you have the conversation with,
to ask, explain.
hey, what are you doing differently in light of this, I think is okay. And that's the conversation you should be having with the police is, well, how can we make things better?
Isn't any lawsuit that's basically concluded and adjudicated and settled, isn't that automatically part of the public record?
It's part of the public record the whole time.
Yeah.
The whole time that it's, I mean, unless there's some reason that it's sealed, but the issue that I'm raising is, to a degree, these folks are officials for the town, so you have to be pretty careful about what you're talking about. You don't want to have a situation where you're saying something is fact when when that fact isn't established. But yes, it's all part of the public record. As soon as, with very limited exceptions, as soon as a complaint is filed, it's part of the public record. The fact that it exists, you can certainly talk about. What the allegations are, you can talk about, but getting into the here's what really happened kind of conversation is a trickier thing.
Do we have to worry about that impacting litigation? We should only talk after everything's final. I mean, it's public record as soon as it's filed, but is there anything?
As a lawyer, I say, yeah, don't talk about it, but it's hard for me to say that you can't. It would be my preference.
Well, like we were talking, Jeannie was talking about the protocol that was used when the select board did their review. And I'd like to feel like we understood what didn't go the way we'd hoped it went, so that we wouldn't have to follow in those footsteps. And that would be something that would be helpful if when we get to the place of reviewing, so.
Yeah.
Another question that I'm not sure if this is directly pertinent or not, but it's the question of apologies. So, before this board ever came along, I'm involved in Interfaith Council, and we had a person who spoke to us about an incident, and they were concerned about the police's, what they thought was a non-response. And we met a couple of times, and Cam went through the body cameras and found that the officer never actually talked to the person who made the complaint. And he said, this was a mistake, and we really want to respond to everybody who makes a complaint. And so I'm wondering, is making an apology an appropriate response to a complaint?
It might maybe in the right circumstances, but I think that unfortunately that's the kind of scenario that they'd have to be talking to their superiors about, and probably legal counsel, depending on what the situation was, before they chose their words on how to react to a particular thing.
So for us to talk with the police department about whether an apology has been made, or is that an appropriate topic for us to talk about or not?
I don't see why you can't ask the question.
Okay. And then they would have to, but their response might be carefully made.
It may be something along the line, it may be yes, no, or it may be something like, I'm on the advice of counsel, I'm not talking about that issue right now. I think it's just, without a specific fact pattern, I think it's really hard to say a general rule about that, because there's just such a broad, and there's such a broad array of things that could come of that, number one, and there's policy in both directions.
About apologizing and not apologizing.
Yeah. There's competing policy about that, so.
And there's also the dynamic with the person, the person's making the complaint, that they never feel at peace until they find out, well, really, what happened? Was this a mistake? Did we go on, or is this, and so those complaints can just build and roil, and that's what. But we could talk about that.
You can talk about it, and you can talk about other peacekeeping activities, so to speak, community building activities, other suggestions for, we need to have a better conversation about this, and here are some ways we think that could happen, and make those suggestions.
So in a situation like we have now, when I don't know how it works, the town is being sued, the police department being sued for actions or behavior. As town attorney, is your job to win the case, or is your job to establish the true facts and come up with an equitable resolution?
So in that scenario, I typically do not represent the town.
Okay.
I'm not in that vein of litigation.
Okay.
So.
Okay.
But a lawyer's job is as an advocate, and there are lots of ethical rules about what you can and can't do in that advocacy. So.
Well, maybe I'm thinking more in terms of the select board. I mean, in this situation, is the goal simply to win the case, or is the goal to say, oh, this happened and we need to come up with an equitable resolution for the complaint?
I don't know if that's for us.
I don't.
I think that's
honestly, it's different in every case. It really is.
Okay.
Some cases it's no holds barred. Some cases it's how do we make this right and get a resolution.
Okay.
In some cases, there's no resolution other than the judge needs to decide.
Right.
And then you'll live with it.
Everyone.
Any other questions?
Well, I really appreciate all your hard work on this and your thoughtful questions. I know that I'm going to have hard questions when I come before this board, so I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Meryl.
Thank you.
Right. So, next on the agenda are the committee updates. So can I get a motion to hear from the outreach committee? No? Can I get, okay, let's go into the committee updates. Is there an update from outreach? Or we didn't?
I believe Will was going to give that update.
I don't have.
I don't don't know if we
I have a
one.
communications and a RRC one,
Okay.
that's it.
All right.
Was there anything you wanted to do with those questions that you asked me to come up with?
Yeah, I sent you an email on that, and we'll
Yeah.
talk about them on the review
Okay.
committee. Yeah, or
Okay.
for when we get into the listening session with
Oh, okay.
the
Okay,
training.
great,
Yep.
great.
All right, how about communications committee?
Yes,
Then
I've
you wanna
got
start
something
that?
here. So, Communications Committee met a couple of weeks ago, maybe, at the firehouse, and came up with a final draft of a CPARB communications plan, which was worked out with the Town of Bennington's communication coordinator. I'd be happy to read the charge that we came up with for the Communications Committee. If you want me to read the whole document, I can, but I think everyone has seen
The
it.
charge.
It's pretty cut and dried. So the charge of the Communications Committee is to implement and manage a communications plan which will maximize the board's communication with the community, as well as facilitating effective communications between the CPARB, the Bennington Select Board, and the Bennington Police Department. And I guess, do we have to approve that? Do I offer that for
Do we have any
discussion?
discussion on it? Is there any? Okay, all right. So,
Oh.
okay. Okay. So this will be on our
Next month?
April agenda? Or
Not
March?
March. Should only take 30
March is Brian Core.
It should only take 30 seconds.
Okay, we'll put it on the March agenda.
Okay.
All right, so if you can just prepare to have motions and review all this, and if there's any questions, we can go through it, and then we'll get it approved hopefully at the next meeting.
Yes, hopefully.
So will that text be in the agenda, or do I need to have the text for both of those documents in the minutes? The charge and the plan, or the, whatever you,
Yeah.
You can put them, I sent them to you. I've emailed them to you.
I didn't find them, so I must have lost them, sorry.
I sent them with the agenda.
Oh, with the agenda?
Yep, everything I sent. You have all of it. But I'll send it again if you need me to.
I think I need you, I'm sorry.
Okay, I will resend it. So, okay,
Okay.
all right. And then we have the Research Review Committee charge. If you want to read that?
Yes, and I believe, I don't know if we wanted to make public the document that Marcia and I also came up with.
Nope.
But nope, okay, so that's going to be private, okay. So the Research Review Committee charges as follows. The Research Review Committee, RRC, will study procedures used by established community policing review processes to understand how other departments and police systems manage the critical insight and feedback of the public, the police, and members of their boards to improve and advise the Bennington Police Department on its practices and procedures, which may include discipline, training, gathering, and use of data and policies. The RRC, there's a typo there, will utilize training and resources provided by the town to guide RRC recommendations to be made for the review processes executed by CPARB. So, yeah, the only thing is just we accidentally, there's a misspell, but that doesn't change the meaning, so. And we can approve that in March as well.
We'll put that on in March.
Communications plan. Yep.
Is it necessary to have which may include discipline, training, gathering, and use data and policies in there?
March,
I just wonder if it
Oh,
kind of limits. If it's not in there, is it more inclusive of other things that maybe we might have forgotten? Just a comment.
So if that weren't in there, just leave it far open in, right?
I mean, we don't have to. I don't remember.
No, I mean, I don't know. I'm just asking.
I
May
don't
include.
remember us writing that in there, to be honest. That's maybe poor on my memory, but we can take it out. Do we want? Okay, strike it. Okay.
Okay. And we can vote on that in March.
Yep. All right, thank you.
Okay. Any other committee updates?
Okay, so I don't know how to fit this in, so maybe it's a committee update, I don't know. I don't think it's an update. So let me just say what I'm thinking of, and you can tell me that this isn't the right time. So the town's webpage is up, the new webpage is up, and I think it's running fine, it's permanent now. On the CPARB page of the webpage, there is, I forget what the title of it, it's like a community input field, something, you can make comments on it. I know we haven't adopted it yet, but in keeping with our communications plan, I would like to ask the communication coordinator to send out an announcement of that feature so people can know that it's there. So I would ask the chair, I don't know if this is a motion or we need a vote, to contact Jonah and ask him to please send out an announcement that comment form is available on the webpage.
Okay.
And he's anticipating that anyway, so kind of waiting to hear from us.
I looked at the website this week and was very excited by it. It really, the whole website, and the police department's website.
Right.
It has the whole history of our work and has a wonderful video tour of the police department. And for people who have any interest in seeing what the police department looks like inside, that's really fascinating.
That's great.
And the thing that I thought I saw in the police department section, there was a place where people could make input on how we could improve community policing. And I'm not sure if that's the same document that you're talking about.
No, this is
that's a different one, and that's a
different. It's
different.
just a way to send comments to
That's for our page. That'll come, and when somebody does comment in there, it comes to me.
It goes to the chair.
Yep.
Right.
And apparently when things come in on that police department webpage with suggestions about community policing, which is a part of our work, those will also go to you. So that that'll be good too. Hopefully we'll get some input. We haven't yet, but.
So, all right, so upcoming agenda items. So in March, we have Brian Corr, who is the Cambridge Consulting. You can join us up here. You thought you would sneak in, I didn't.
That's right.
Welcome, Jeff. Brian Corr will be with us in March. He will be doing some more training for CPARB, and we'll be starting with our listening session and planning that. After that, that will be probably the bulk of the meeting, in addition to the committee updates. When we get into April, we hope to start scheduling some additional, maybe guests coming in and stuff, and working on that. So I don't know if there's anything else that anyone else wants to add to the list. Will and I did meet on the agenda, and we are trying to just start a little bit of plan of out through the rest of the calendar year, to see, what's in there, just trying to keep track of some of the forums that are going on, that people are attending, and just, trying to see who we can get in to come in either for organizations or BPD on policies, perhaps some other law enforcement on policies and stuff with, some of the organizations. So
I've got a couple of, I don't know where this fits in, a couple of questions, I guess, or I don't know if it's new business or what, but anyway, so let me just say what I'm thinking of. So the select board, I think, has approved the quality control, internal investigations, and discipline policy, is that correct? Okay, so the policy was separated from the procedure, and my understanding is that CPARB is supposed to meet with the police and work out the procedure that goes along with this policy? Is that what was said when it was approved?
I think it's the police's job to follow procedures. The police will set up their procedures. You're free to comment on them after they do that, but...
Okay, because I heard something quite different at that select board meeting, that we were kind of being told to sit down with the police and work out the procedure. So that is not correct?
No. Not initially, no.
Okay.
I thought we were supposed to sit down and work the details of how we were going to get the procedure the process started for it. Not how, we're not actually going to be doing their procedures, but just the process for that.
So does anyone know what that discussion looks like, or how it's going to take place, or what needs to be done to get it started?
So can I get a motion for a committee to work on procedures for this specific task with the police department?
I move, yeah.
Okay. Can I get a second?
I'll second that.
Tom shaking his head, I can't do that. Okay.
Okay.
I can put it on the agenda in March?
Oh, it has to be an agenda.
Okay, my
so-
apologies.
yep, okay.
Really? Oh.
Thank
So-
you.
Yeah, all right.
So
Okay.
we're going to put on the March agenda to
Yeah.
create a
Okay.
committee
Pro-
to go over procedures?
procedures.
Okay, I'll
Okay.
write that down to note.
And what was the other thing?
I have a comment kind of to follow off of Robert. The only thing I had on the QC policy was about the review date, just because we've read through the policy and made all of our changes. I noticed it said every 2 years after adoption. I thought they said that was on a rolling basis, like it has to be finalized every 2 years, but that we could go back in 8 months and say, actually, we want to add
You can,
this.
we can always go back and look at policies,
Okay.
but they have to be reviewed at least every 2 years
Yeah, so,
on that, so.
yeah, because they just put every 2 years, so that's why I didn't see the at least.
But I think
Okay.
that's pretty much standard when you have a policy, is it's going to say it's reviewed annually, which I don't understand why it's not annually, but, or every 2 years or every 3
Okay.
years, but
Okay.
that would.
That was
but-
my only question.
Yeah, I
Thank
think
you.
those are in place just so that they're minimally looked at occasionally on
And so
that
I've
thing.
got one more thing then. Are we now in a position where we can request from the chief of police a statistical summary of complaints, say, over the past year? Can we make that request now, or does something else have to be approved before we can do that?
They're still working on the computer software that's going to generate those reports, and they haven't been trained on it yet, as I don't believe.
And that's the only way to get the information?
At this point.
At this
I
point.
think.
They had a summary when the task force was working.
But they've switched computer programs since then,
Yeah,
March.
so I didn't know if they
so,
had
yeah.
anything they could offer us or not. Maybe not, I don't know.
I'd be happy to talk to the chief for you.
Yeah, let's start looking at this stuff.
If there's something to look at.
There may not even be anything there. Yeah, who knows? Thank you.
All right, so anything else? If not, can I get a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
So I have one
Oh,
quick-
sorry.
Just in the coming months, we should, as a board, review that form that Jeannie was talking about, the complaint review protocol document. So we can put that on our agenda and go over that as a board, look at it, discuss it with Tom or Jeannie or.
Are we going to discuss that as a board, or would we put that in the committee that it most relates to? Because I would assume that would go well with what Marsh and I are doing with the.
I think it should go to the whole board so that
The whole board?
everyone's aware of it and then
Okay.
see where it is. That's a town policy, right? So it really isn't anything that we could change, we just need to be aware of. Protocol. So.
Which means the state is mandating you do it, or, no, okay.
No, it's less official than a policy.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Anything else? Yep.
Got a motion on the floor.
Motion to adjourn?
I second.
Second. We are adjourned until Thursday, March 16th at 6 PM in this very room.
Oh, my God.
Cat TV is celebrating 30 years of community media. Help support Cat TV's next 30 years by becoming a member today. Your membership will help us continue covering meaningful, local content. Thank you for supporting your local community media station.